one of the things that is important for real estate operations and asset management is to have a defined plan when you want to take over a property. So it's great that we do all this underwriting. We get our analysis done, and then all of a sudden you get the property under contract. Everything is good. You've done your due diligence, and now you're ready to close. Part of that process is to ensure that you have a smooth transition so that when you take over operating the property, you are hitting the ground running from day one. So one of the things that we focus on at passiveinvesting.com is coordinating with our property management company to ensure a smooth transition. And to do that, we have a very, very detailed checklist that we go through in conjunction with our due diligence to ensure that we have all of the information that's necessary. But taking a step back, one of the terms you may hear a lot from people in the closing process is a kind of go dark period. That's a point in time when the prior management company shuts down operations on their end. So that way you can have all of your prorations, expenses, invoices, everything shut down at a certain point in time. So you are allowed to, so you then can cleanly transition data into the new system. Ideally, for larger properties, you would want to have that go dark period be about 7 days prior to the close date. This way, you don't have any hiccups that happen. You can deal with any bounce checks that may occur if you're still accepting paper payments or in-person payments. Anything that gets kicked out for non-sufficient funds should show up within that 7-day period so that you can add all of that into your closing prorations to ensure that you have all the information necessary to do the takeover. It also allows the new management company time to upload all of the information into their systems so that you can, when you take over, go back live under your operating system. So in the case of our last deal, prior management company used a different operating system. They used Entrata and we used RealPage. So the transition was smooth because you can transfer and port over a lot of the data electronically, but that 7-day window gives you enough time to add all of the information that's necessary to be up and running. Part of the transition process is also to, don't let things fall through the cracks. So one of the most difficult things that you need to be aware of is a lot of the utility transfers do take time and require a lot of documents to be signed. So one of the things that we do during our due diligence process is we review all of our utility bills and water, gas, sewer, electric, cable, make sure we have all of that information documented of who we need to talk to. But then we put together a plan of who we have to call with the gas company, electric company, get all of that documentation done in writing so that we can transfer things over. A lot of things can delay that, especially for like water and sewer. Water and sewer is one of those unique things that if you ever bought a house, a lot of times they won't transfer water and sewer over until you have a recorded deed. For commercial deals, sometimes you can get the recorded deed to happen instantaneously because if the community or the county that you're working in does electronic recording, it happens really, really quickly. Other times it could take weeks, even months to get the deed recorded. So part of the closing process is to track when all the documents were submitted and follow up on a regular basis to ensure that those utilities are transferred over. again, the closing process is very, very closely linked to the due diligence process. Because of that, you want to make sure that you are well aware of all of the items that you need to have in place before you actually, before the day of closing. A lot of the detail that we're talking about here goes back to your contract negotiations. So your due diligence is only as good as your contract, and your contract kind of dictates what you're allowed to do during due diligence. So we always put in a our checklist that we have for closing is always typically included in our due diligence section of the contract, so that we ask for everything, and then what we negotiate as part of our contract negotiations kind of outlines what we are required to receive. That doesn't mean you can't ask for additional information that's not in the contract, and typically contracts will have a generic clause that says something like if available or whatever. You want to ensure that you are spending the time and effort to follow up with the sellers to ensure you get that information. With regard to that kind of go dark period, once you get everything in process, you need to have your on-site staff ready to go. So as you get prepared for closing, you need to time out your interviews with all of the staff on site. Again, if you're self-managed, it's something that you have to be responsible for. For us that has a third-party property manager, we rely on them to give us the feedback on the quality of the existing staff. One of the things that you need to keep an eye out for is, in certain instances, management companies may transition, let's just say, existing staff to other properties that they're going to own longer term that may have been involved with the property for an extended period of time. So they'll move those people out once the property is listed for sale, and they'll put new staff in place. So you want to stay very, very focused on when people started at the property and what their knowledge base is of the property. That's critical, because having that historical operating knowledge of the property is important to have. Almost more important to have the service tech and the maintenance supervisor maintained at the property, more so than a property manager, just because the service techs and the maintenance staff, they're dealing with the day-to-day issues that pop up as part of the property. So these are kind of the key focal points that I like to highlight at the just what you have to be prepared for with closing. One thing people tend to forget about is, the operational issues of, hey, I have to get my management agreement set up for a lender. I need to get bank accounts set up. You need to have all of that live and ready to go a couple of days before closing, so that you can test to make sure everything is working. If you're doing any kind of auto pay out of the system, you need to make sure that you are pre-funding your operating accounts. Typically, that will include things like an operating reserve that you're going to put in there. You may have to put in a payroll reserve for your management company, because the timing of rent payments coming in require the management company to front some cash. And typically they want to have at least 2 weeks worth of payroll in their accounts to not have to fund that payment going forward. So all of those items that you want to look at to see, okay, hey, I've got my insurance, I've got my debt in place, I've got our management agreement in place, we're ready to take over. Here we go. I typically will send our team out to the property at about 9 o'clock in the morning on takeover day, even if we haven't closed, just so that they are there to hit the ground running. We typically overstaff on the first day, because it is critical to make sure that all the existing residents at the property are aware that you're here, you're taking over the property. While things may change, it's going to change in a positive way. Those types of issues that could arise of people saying, hey, I sent my rent in here, I sent my rent in there. A lot of times in certain quality of assets, people try to take advantage of a transition and get away from having to pay. With that go dark period, you are able to ensure that that's not something that would be an option for people to say, hey, I sent my rent in, because you have the normal process of where the old management company was there. That 7-day window, they kind of hold all the rent collected at a certain period of time. And then you manually enter all of those checks that you may have received or payments that came in during that 7-day window, the day of closing, into your new system. And you can ensure that everything is done. Over communicate with your residents so that you can tell them, hey, this is what's happening on this day. If something happens, it's personal choice. You can waive late fees for like a 48-hour period if during transition. Those types of things will be addressed on a property by property basis. At the end of the day, you want to ensure the transition is as smooth as possible for the residents and for you from an operating standpoint. Also want to let you guys know, if you have questions, you can put them into the chat section, so that way I can see if anybody has anything that questions on the kind of closing process and the takeover process. On a kind of different topic, one of the things that we always do with regard to our properties is we have our property management company review our underwriting once we go kind of non-refundable. That way we ensure that our first budget for the property will be our underwriting. Because of that, we get their buy-in very, very early so that they're aware of what their goals are for the asset. Typically, I will have them upload because we break out our underwriting on a monthly basis. I will have them upload that budget into their system. And the only adjustments that we would typically make would be for timing, because a lot of times our acquisition folks just divide everything by 12 and plug it in, not knowing that there's a cyclical nature to how we operate a property. That way we have a solid baseline from which the property management company and ownership are all working from the same spot. We typically will give ourselves a 60-day grace period, because there's so many variables that happen with, you can't stop a seller from burying invoices that they received in a desk and then walking away and saying, oops, we forgot about it. That is something that we always address during our post-closing true-up process. But what it does is it messes up your kind of annualized numbers by having some invoices that should have been paid months ago that got buried, and you end up having these very odd one-off expenses that happen in the first 2 or 3 months of ownership. You just want to make sure that you're aware of those, you document that, you note it, because lenders are always going to question why some of these expenses are the way they are. And you want to be able to explain exactly what you're doing with regard to your income and expenses. I do have a question on our comprehensive checklist template. I don't know if we are sharing anything, actual documents, but I can kind of go through our detailed checklist real quick. Let me pull this up real quick. All right. So this is a checklist I developed over time for everything. So as you can see, I use this as my due diligence checklist for the basically everything for the property. So I can, trying to get to a place where I can actually share some information here. So I have a single document that contains all the information for the property. This is all the contact information, basic property information, all the contacts for the buyer and seller. Here is our due diligence tracking sheet, which has information on, probably more information than you typically would need. This is what we have, who's going to be responsible for it, when we got it, so that way we can track this throughout the process. This way we have a list of, hey, this is everything that we've done. This is what we need. I want to make sure we have all this information. What does the lender require? We've actually specialized this with our property management company because this is the information that they definitely need to have in order to take over a property. This is our delivery checklist, so that when we have all the information, we know who sent it and when we received it. That way we can make sure that we're not missing anything. We have actually amended this document a little bit so that anything that is included in the contract will get highlighted and say this is required to be sent. So any required documents will be included or highlighted. And then there's other things that we would ask for that they may not have, like, certificates of occupancy. We ask for it, they may not have it, but we want to make sure we get all that. A critical point for operations is we need all of these documents here for takeover. So we need your utility bills, your leases, your billing summaries, your lease files, all your property contracts. All of these documents are things that we need to ensure we have to say, hey, we're going to assume these agreements, we're going to terminate these other agreements. All of these reports, it's very extensive, are ones that we need to populate the new system. So we're using RealPage, so we need all of these documents to ensure we have the information needed to manage the property correctly. I've got a legal tab just because I'm overly cautious and I want to make sure I stay on top of our attorneys to make sure we have everything that we need. I have our lender tab to make sure we know who ordered the appraisal, who's doing that, the PCAs, all that stuff during due diligence. Our information that we need for insurance, typically it's the claim history, etc. And then, what we need for closing to set up, one, the wire transfers, making sure we have all that documented information ready to go. Who's going to transition all these different data points with regard to setting up new bank accounts? Which employees are we keeping? Which employees are being let go? And being able to get them uploaded into the property management system. I always like to head out to the property in a week or two after closing, when they can actually take a breath to meet everybody and kind of introduce them to what our process is. One thing of note that I like to point out is we need to make sure somebody is walking every unit at least 72 hours before closing, so that you are aware of which units are vacant, the condition of all of those units, and do a verification of the personal property list, which is all part of the contract process. We've had a lot of history of things where somebody will have a laptop that they've been using at the property for 3 or 4 years, and they just assume it's theirs, so they take it. So those are things that you want to make sure are either A, left at the property, or B, you get a credit for from a replacement standpoint. It's really important to review things in the maintenance shed and in the leasing office. Sometimes people may take little tchotchkes out of the clubhouse, those things happen. You can't tell if it's the residents or the employees, but the critical items are the maintenance shed and the leasing office to ensure you have all the equipment and things necessary to be operational day one. Things that people tend to overlook are things like check scanners. I mean, who would have thought that someone would take a check scanner, but sometimes they do. Or ensuring that the check scanner that you have is compatible with the system that you're using or your bank. If the bank is accepting of that type of check scanner, it's something that you would want to make sure you put out there for everybody. So, all right. Sorry about that. Okay, we're about 20 minutes in. I want to kind of open it up to questions for people. Our checklist is proprietary for passiveinvesting.com. I actually uploaded all of this over my years of experience with doing asset management for large and small companies. A lot of the things that we talked about just to let you know are applicable whether you're buying a 300 unit institutional quality asset or you're buying a 4 or 8 unit property. You want to make sure that you understand what the utility process is. You want to make sure that if there are employees, that you have a chance to review them and know who's going to be doing what. You want to make sure that you have all of your leases, all of the information, who is doing automatic deposits, who's not, so that way you can check, so that when you hit the ground running the day you take over, there are fewer and fewer unknowns, which is one of the biggest risks for people taking over property. You don't know what you don't know until you're on the ground. And having a detailed process to follow when you take over a property is the best way to ensure that you minimize the amount of unknowns as you go into a certain situation. Any other questions? What is your opinion on using a target property management company doing the DD as opposed to hiring an outside inspection firm? Well, there's two things. One, an outside inspection firm is critical for for lender inspections. So I always do we always do an independent property condition assessment report, PCA. That's typically a lender requirement. So on a physical, on the physical side of the asset, having someone come in and look at the mechanical systems, the foundations, roofs, everything is important. We have a great working relationship with our property management company because their team will go in and do our unit walks with us. So they'll walk every unit and do an inspection of everything that's in the property, getting us a checklist of what's the quality of the appliances, the countertops, the bathrooms, the carpet, the walls, the ceiling, light fixtures, everything. So we have a good baseline for what the condition is of the property. Typically in a PCA, the inspectors aren't going to be looking at the finished level of the property. They're going to be looking at the major systems, exterior issues, foundation issues. The property management company doing the unit walks is going to do a much more detailed inspection of the property to know, one, what is the quality of the residents that we have there? How are they treating the property? And then two, understanding, hey, in this, let's say it's a 100-unit property, we may have 20% of the units are going to need to have carpet replaced, and they can put together a forecast of capital, replacement reserve capital going forward. Would it make sense to ask the lender for their approved list of inspection companies? Oh yeah, typically we wouldn't even bother hiring our own inspection company. We default to the lender because it's just easier that way. Typically they have 1 or 2 approved, and we would just look at those and take the ones that are best suited. If there is a prior inspection report that you have access to, we would always try to reuse those companies because one, it's going to be a little bit cheaper, and two, the speed at which you can get a report would be better because they kind of know the property because they've already done an inspection. Let's see, do you ask seller for date following the closing for true-up utilities? Typically, it's in the contract that you would have a true-up period. We usually try to get 90 days. That allows us to, one, get all the utilities transferred over and ensure whether things are paid in arrears or in advance, we can understand that. And then also gives us the opportunity to find those hidden bills that mysteriously got put in the back of a drawer somewhere in the office that typically pop up throughout the process. We have had issues where the sellers misrepresented certain things and we've had to extend true-up periods. But for the most part, you should be able to get everything done within 90 days. But again, that's going to be a contractually obligated term in most contracts. Any other questions? We're hitting our 30-minute mark. I'm happy to stick around and answer other questions. All right. Well, like I said, if you guys have information, you can always reach out to the folks at Multifamily Investor Nation, and they can get information out to you guys. And hopefully I will see all of you at the Investor Nation conference in June in Charlotte. So you guys have a great holiday season coming up. Thank you very much.